Do you notice how the soft glow of a single lantern can make even the most ordinary doorway feel like a passage into another age? The thought brushes against you the moment you step toward the Judean farmhouse, its mud brick walls still warm from the day's sun, its threshold outlined by nothing more than a wavering oil lamp flame. The sky above you is drifting lazily into twilight, that gentle hour when shadows stretch long and the world grows quiet enough for ancient stories to rise again. And since this is a slow tale, meant to drift into your mind like steam from a warm bowl, I'll give you one tiny reality check before we keep going. If you were actually here, you'd probably trip over at least 3 goats before reaching the door. But tonight, they politely stay out of your way. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you're listening from, and what time it is for you right now. It's always magical to see these ancient whispers connecting people across the world. You don't pause any longer. You simply step forward, and the story folds around you like soft cloth. The doorway is low enough that you have to duck under the lintel, wood worn smooth by many hands before yours. As you enter, the immediate impression is warmth, the kind that feels stored rather than produced, seeping from clay floors, earthen walls, and woven mats. A single oil lamp rests on a narrow ledge beside the entry, giving off a golden flicker and a faint smell of olive oil. If you've ever burned cheap candles that smell like plastic, this is nothing like that. This flame is honest, ancient, and it sputters softly, as if whispering its approval. Your eyes take a moment to adjust. The space opens into a main room where the evening's quiet routines linger. A rough-hewn wooden table, low to the ground, sits off to one side. Near it, a grinding stone waits. Flat saddle quern below, rounded hand stone above. One of the oldest, simplest machines humans ever built. Historians still argue whether the earliest versions came from Natufian hunter-gatherers or from even older desert communities. But that debate drifts out of your awareness as another sound steals your attention. The faint rustle of wind along the outer wall and the tiny rhythmic chirp of crickets beginning their nightly chorus. A clay jar stands near your feet, its rim sticky with a thin coat of honey left behind by the last time someone dipped into it. Honey in this region is never an afterthought. People once traded it, stored it, cherished it long before sugarcane became anyone's preferred sweetener. And here, in this Judean farmhouse, you're about to bake honey cakes, simple, fragrant, and quietly celebratory. A mainstream historical fact slips into your mind. Bees were so well regarded in the ancient Levant that beekeeping installations from Tel Rehof show an entire organized apiary dating back to the 10th century BCE. Imagine that. Honey not just as a treat, but as a full-scale industry. Your fingers brush the jar's warm clay, and you gather it gently. There's something almost ceremonial about it, as though each motion is part of a practiced ritual. The honey inside is thick, slow, and golden, so rich that when you tilt the jar, it moves with the deliberate grace of sunset melting over mountains. That's your first quirky tidbit of the night. Did you know that some ancient households used honey not just for cooking, but also as a mild antiseptic and, brace yourself, a primitive hair gel? If you ever want your curls to hold during a Judean summer, apparently ancient wisdom has you covered. The air inside the farmhouse smells of grain, ash, and faint sweetness. You take another step forward and notice woven baskets stacked neatly along the wall. Some hold barley, others contain wheat. People in this ancient land cultivated both, though barley tended to be the grain of choice for most daily meals. It's sturdy, dependable, and forgiving. A little like an old friend who doesn't complain no matter how often you knead them into dough. You crouch near the grinding stone. The cool surface under your fingers carries the faint memory of countless earlier evenings, when someone else, perhaps a mother humming softly, or a grandmother with joints that creaked like old door hinges, worked this same routine. The polished texture shows the passage of time in each smooth curve. You pick up the handstone. It's heavier than you expect, and its weight settles into your palms like a reminder of the patience required here. If modern kitchen mixers were somehow introduced into this world, 1,000 ancient shoulders would rejoice. The room glows softly with only that one small lamp, but your mind fills in the details effortlessly. Chickens shuffle somewhere in the courtyard. A jar lid rattles lightly as a breeze nudges it. A donkey brays far off, because of course there's always one donkey eager to express its opinion about life. That's your second joke. The donkey will have more to say later. You ease yourself onto a woven mat, feeling the rough texture beneath you. Then you lean forward with both hands placed firmly on the grinding stone. You push. The grain crackles faintly as it begins to break down, shells splitting and turning to powder under the rhythmic pressure. The movement becomes hypnotic, drawing you into a slow, steady cadence. Forward, back, forward, back. You can almost hear the echo of thousands of years of hands that repeated this motion before yours. Somewhere in this rhythm, a thought rises. People often imagine ancient life as harsh or unforgiving. But here, inside the lantern-lit hush of a Judean farmhouse, you sense something else. A softness, a slowness, a sense that time yields gently when you approach it with intention. You pause for a moment to stretch your fingers. The powder gathering on the lower stone forms a pale mound, soft as sifted snow. You brush it carefully into a clay bowl, feeling a simple satisfaction settle in your chest. Funny how grinding grain can feel more meditative than any modern mindfulness app. Your hand returns to the honey jar almost instinctively. You dip 2 fingers inside and watch as the thick golden ribbon trails from your touch. The sweetness glistens even in the dim light. Bees from centuries ago made this. Tiny, determined creatures flying from blossom to blossom without the faintest idea that their day's work would someday become your evening's comfort. You breathe in deeply. The scent? Grain, honey, warm clay, olive oil, melds into the quiet promise of what you're about to make. A promise that tastes of the land itself. Behind you, the farmhouse door creaks slightly as the wind shifts, the sound carrying through the stillness. The crickets outside have grown louder now, not annoying, but soothing, like droplets of sound falling into the dark. You press your hand against the warm wall, grounding yourself in this place. And for just a moment, you imagine that the stories carved into these stones whisper subtle truths that only long patience can reveal. You don't speak. You simply breathe, and the farmhouse keeps breathing with you. You remain kneeling by the grinding stone for a few breaths, letting the last golden traces of honey cling to your fingers before wiping them gently on a scrap of woven cloth nearby. The soft, grainy scent of the flower, slightly sweet, slightly earthy, lingers in the air, reminding you that everything you're doing tonight begins with something as humble as barley. You shift your weight, settling a little more comfortably on the woven mat, and your gaze drifts back toward the saddle quern. Its surface is worn smooth from centuries of hands shaping centuries of meals, a detail that always humbles you. This is no museum exhibit with a rope around it. This is a working voice from the past. You pick up another handful of barley kernels, letting them cascade through your fingers like quiet rainfall. The grains bounce lightly across the stone slab before settling into a small pile you'll need to work through next. You lean in again, pressing the handstone down with both palms. Immediately the soft crackle returns, the uniquely satisfying sound of grain yielding to pressure. There's a rhythm to it, a pulse matching your breath. Forward, back, lift, reset. Forward, back again. Before long, the movement becomes so natural that your mind begins to wander. You picture a Judean household 2,000 years before your arrival, perhaps with children sitting nearby, watching as their mother worked this very stone. They might have snuck a few raw grains to crunch between their teeth. Maybe a sheep wandered inside, only to be shooed out with an exasperated flap of a hand. Even now, you half expect a stray sheep to barge in just to give you a skeptical look. That's your first light joke for this section, and you imagine the sheep raising one unimpressed eyebrow if sheep had such expressive eyebrows. You keep grinding. The gentle burn in your forearms grows familiar, not painful, just present, like a quiet reminder that ancient living required strength in unexpected places. One mainstream historical fact slips naturally into the moment. Barley-dominated diets in Iron Age Judea, not simply for flavor or availability, but because it tolerated drought far better than wheat. Farmers trusted it the way you trust your favorite warm shirt. Reliable, forgiving, always there even when the weather tried to misbehave. Your eyes lift briefly to the low, wooden ceiling, supported by beams plastered with clay and straw. Small cracks run through the plaster, like lightning frozen mid-strike. One of those cracks holds a fringe tidbit of truth. Historians found evidence that some households intentionally left tiny gaps for ventilation, allowing smoke to escape and heat to circulate. Whether this home's cracks were deliberate, or simply the result of time and stubborn goats brushing against the exterior is something historians still argue about, but either explanation feels charming enough. A breeze slips through the doorway again, carrying with it the aroma of something faintly resinous, perhaps juniper burning in a neighbor's hearth or crushed herbs drying outside. The fragrance mingles beautifully with the grain on the stone, forming a scent you want to bottle and keep forever. You keep grinding, each motion turning kernels into fine powder. With every sweep, the stone grows warmer under your palms, gathering a subtle heat produced entirely by your effort. The flour now forming at the edge of the quern has an almost silky texture. You brush the growing mound into the bowl with the side of your hand, the powder soft enough to cling lightly to your fingertips. When you lift the bowl to inspect it, your shadow shifts across the earthen wall, stretching gently across the room like an ancient mural brought to life. You blow softly across the bowl. A gentle cloud rises, illuminated by the oil lamp's flicker. The air becomes a constellation of pale grains swirling and settling. If this moment belonged in a modern kitchen, you'd probably sneeze and make a mess on your countertop. But here, in this hushed farmhouse, it feels almost ceremonial. You resume your work, grinding the last of the grains. As the sound resumes its soothing cadence, your mind drifts again, this time to the archaeological digs scattered across the Judean hills. You imagine researchers brushing dirt away from hearthstones similar to the one you sit beside now, uncovering charred seeds, cracked pottery, bits of woven cloth hardened by ash. One archaeologist once joked that ancient households left behind so much grain residue that sweeping it today feels like cleaning up after someone who stepped out only a moment ago. That's your second light joke. The oil lamp beside the doorway sputters briefly, but continues glowing. Its small flame casts a soft circle of gold across the floor, creating a perfect island of light in an otherwise shadow-filled world. Shadows shift around the grinding stone as you move, stretching across the room like quiet companions. You pause again to flex your fingers. The handstone now feels warm, almost comforting. You place it gently aside, the stone thumping softly against the packed earth floor. You roll your shoulders back, and a faint crack in your spine reminds you that time may be timeless in stories, but your body still keeps score. With the grinding done, you gather the last of the flour into the bowl and hold it close to the lamp. The color is beautiful, pale, warm, and slightly uneven, as ancient flour should be. No processed perfection here, just something genuine. You walk to the small wooden table, stepping carefully so as not to disturb the newly settled dust cloud. There you set the bowl down, and for a moment your eyes drift over the table's surface, covered with faint knife marks, small dents, patches of discoloration from years of meals prepared in love and necessity. The table could tell stories if tables were inclined to gossip, and you suspect this one would have plenty to say. That's your third joke for this section, though you also imagine the table clearing its throat dramatically before revealing secrets. You return briefly to the doorway. Outside, twilight is settling deeper, painting the sky in darkening shades of blue and lavender. The quiet rustle of palm fronds echoes faintly from somewhere beyond the farmhouse's walls. It's a reminder that life here flows with a different rhythm, slower, more deliberate, shaped by the land and by the hands of people who understood the value of patience. A donkey brays again in the distance, but more softly now, as if offering you encouragement. The air cools. You take one final look at the grinding stone, a partner in tonight's work, and let the moment settle. The flour is ready, the honey waits, and so does the story, stretching ahead like a warm path into ancient night. You return to the wooden table where the bowl of freshly ground flour waits, soft and pale beneath the lantern's wavering glow. The honey jar sits beside it, heavy and patient, as though it knows you're about to coax something warm and ancient into being. You settle onto the low stool, smooth from years of use, and rest your hands briefly on your knees. The farmhouse air has changed since you last sat here. It's quieter now, with only the faintest crackle from the hearth and the soft brush of wind against the outer wall. Everything feels as if it's leaning toward you, gently urging you to continue. You reach for the honey jar again. Its surface is slightly sticky, a reminder of earlier fingers that dipped inside without the ceremony. You're giving it now. You tilt it, and the thick golden ribbon slips forward, catching the light in such a way that it almost glows from within. It falls slowly, deliberately, into the waiting bowl of flour. The contrast, the pale grain and the deep amber sweetness, looks so striking that you pause briefly, appreciating the simplicity of the moment. Honey in Judean times was a treasure. You remind yourself of a mainstream historical fact. Apiculture in this region was sophisticated enough that entire complexes of clay beehives existed centuries ago, including one excavation where archaeologists uncovered an arrangement that looked suspiciously like the ancient version of a bee condominium. You imagine the bees signing tiny clay contracts, your first light joke for the section, though you suspect they would have complained about the rent. You dip a wooden spoon into the bowl and begin stirring slowly. The honey threads itself through the flour in uneven streaks at first, forming small amber pockets that glisten under the lamp flame. As you continue mixing, the scent grows richer, sweet, warm, and slightly herbal, as if wildflowers from long-forgotten hillsides have snuck their way into the farmhouse. You inhale deeply, letting the fragrance fill your chest. The mixture becomes thicker, clumping into soft mounds that resist the spoon. You set the spoon aside and use your hands instead, letting your fingers sink gently into the dough. It's pleasantly warm from the honey, with a texture that yields easily under your touch. As you knead, the dough presses back, firm yet friendly, like shaking hands with someone who believes in a balanced handshake. It's oddly soothing. You fold the dough over itself again and again, pulling and pressing in a hypnotic rhythm. There's something almost meditative about the process. Perhaps it's the repetitive motion, or the faint crackling sound of tiny air pockets bursting, or the way the honey slowly permeates the dough until everything feels unified. You imagine ancient cooks standing exactly where you are, hands moving with the same quiet confidence. A fringe tidbit drifts into your thoughts. Some households in the region once added crushed coriander seeds into their honey cakes, not for sweetness, but for a peppery warmth that lingered long after the final bite. Others used pine resin for fragrance, something you admit you're glad isn't part of tonight's recipe. Pine-flavored cake feels like the sort of dessert ancient pranksters might dare each other to eat. There's your second light joke. You continue kneading until the dough becomes smooth and cohesive. Your hands glisten faintly with honey, and when you lift them, long amber threads stretch from your fingertips before snapping softly. You scrape the remnants into the bowl and turn the dough gently, admiring its subtle sheen. There's a sense of accomplishment in how simple ingredients have come together. Grain, honey, effort, and time. You're beginning to understand why people across centuries found quiet joy in tasks like these. A gust of evening air slips through the doorway, stirring the lamp's flame into a brief dance. Shadows ripple across the walls, appearing like fleeting visitors passing through the farmhouse. The room feels alive, humming with the soft resonance of ancient routine. You rest your hands on the table and let yourself lean into the moment. You recall something else. Historians still argue whether honey cakes in Iron Age Judea were primarily ritual offerings or everyday treats. Some believe they were eaten after harvest festivals. Others think they sweetened daily meals when honey was abundant. Tonight, you decide they can be both, celebration and comfort, wrapped into one warm, golden form. You turn the dough onto a flat clay board dusted lightly with flour. Pressing down gently, you work it into a smooth mound, then flatten it slightly with the heel of your palm. The texture is perfect, soft but resilient, warm but not sticky. You feel oddly proud, as though the dough itself has recognized your effort and decided to cooperate. Small details begin to take shape in your awareness. The faint scratch of clay against wood, the tiny popping noises from the hearth, the quiet swish of your sleeve as you shift. Every sound feels amplified in the stillness. Outside, a lone bird chirps before settling into its nighttime roost. Inside, the farmhouse exhales a subtle heat that wraps around you like a shawl. You begin to form smaller portions of the dough, pinching and shaping them into round cakes no larger than your palm. Each one feels slightly different, though you try to keep them similar in size. It's humbling to realize that your hands, guided by instinct rather than precise measurement, are performing a task repeated across millennia. As you work, you can almost sense someone behind you, not physically, but as a memory. Perhaps the ghost of an ancient cook observing your technique. You half expect her to nod approvingly or silently pick up a forgotten bowl. That's your third light joke, imagining a ghostly mentor who insists on correct kneading posture. You finish shaping the last cake and arrange them neatly on the clay board. They look small, pale, and unassuming, like tiny promises waiting for fire to reveal their full potential. You touch one lightly. It springs back gently beneath your fingertip. You lean back, stretching your arms above your head. The movement sends a soft crackle through your shoulders, and you sigh contentedly. The dough has taken shape. The honey has worked its magic. And as you glance toward the hearth, you know the next step awaits, summoning the warmth needed to bring these ancient cakes to life. For now, though, you let your hands rest. The wooden table holds the shaped dough pieces like a quiet altar, ready for the next moment in your slow, unfolding story. You let your fingers rest a few moments longer on the wooden table, feeling the faint, sticky sweetness of residual honey clinging gently to your skin. The shaped cakes sit beside you, quiet, pale circles waiting patiently for the warmth that will transform them. The dough feels alive in a way, quietly swelling with confidence, and you sense that the room itself has settled into a gentle expectation. The next step is obvious, and yet you take your time easing into it. Ancient kitchens tolerated no rush. They moved at the pace of breath and ember. So you rise slowly, letting your knees straighten with a small, satisfying crack. If ancient cooks had joint issues too, and they surely did, perhaps they greeted these little noises like familiar companions. That's your first gentle joke of this section. You step toward the hearth, where the tabun oven, rounded, clay and soot-darkened, waits like a slumbering creature. It resembles a giant upside-down bowl with a small opening at the bottom and a top that curves smoothly like the dome of an old hill shrine. You place your palm lightly against its exterior. It's cool now, exactly what you expected. The fire inside has long faded since the afternoon's meal, but it will come alive again at your touch, just as it has thousands of times before. You crouch beside the oven and lift a small clay lid that covers a shallow pit near the opening. Inside sits a modest pile of olive wood kindling, thin branches stored from a grove not far from the farmhouse. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. Olive trees were prized in Judea not only for their fruit, but for their wood, which burned slowly and evenly, making it perfect for cooking. A well-managed olive grove meant food, oil, and fuel, a triple blessing in a land where resources had to be stretched wisely. You gather several small branches in your arms. They give off a faint, slightly peppery scent, the kind that rises from old wood dried thoroughly under the sun. You arrange them carefully inside the oven's hollow belly, stacking them in a loose crisscross pattern. Fire needs breath as much as it needs fuel. You've learned this the gentle way. You reach for a clay bowl containing yesterday's leftover embers, still faintly potent when touched with new fuel. You sift through until you find a fragment still holding the memory of warmth. Using a long-handled iron pick, a simple tool but effective, you transfer it into the heart of the kindling. Then you lean forward and blow softly. Your breath becomes a small wind, coaxing ember toward spark, spark toward flame. A few faint crackles respond. Then a glow. Then the delicate flick of fire curling its first orange tongue around the wood. The tabun's interior begins to glow, bit by bit, as though waking reluctantly from a nap. Shadows dance across your face, weaving in and out of the oven's rounded contours. The smell of warming clay mixes with the first hints of burning wood. You can almost taste the upcoming moment when heat radiates outward fully, making the dough beside you shift in response. You sit back on your heels and watch the flames settle into their own rhythm. Fire, like dough, cannot be rushed. It grows steadily, honestly, with a temperament all its own. A fringe tidbit slips into your thoughts. Some archaeologists believe that ancient families sometimes inscribed tiny protective symbols on the interior of their tabun ovens, simple crosses, circles, or star shapes, to encourage good cooking luck. Historians still argue whether these markings had ritual significance or were just someone testing a sharp stick. Either way, you sense that the oven before you holds its own unspoken blessings. As the flames strengthen, the heat thickens in the air. You turn your face slightly, letting the warmth brush your cheek like a soft hand. The glow inside the oven grows deeper, illuminating the clay floor in a warm golden red. You feed a few more small branches inside, watching them hiss and curl beautifully as the fire accepts them. A light crackle echoes through the room, one of the wooden beams stretching, expanding slightly as the heat spreads. It reminds you that this farmhouse, though unmoving, is not lifeless. It shifts and settles with every change in temperature, like a living creature stretching its limbs after resting. You move back to the table to check on the dough. The cakes look slightly more relaxed now, as though they too have sensed the rising warmth. The smooth surfaces glisten faintly with honey that has begun to seep outward in the fire's growing presence. You run the back of your finger across one cake and notice how soft it feels. Pliant, warm, eager, but still raw. Their transformation hasn't begun yet. A faint donkey bray sounds again outside, your second gentle joke, as if the animal has taken it upon itself to comment on your progress. You shake your head with a small smile, then turn your focus back to the hearth. The fire is ready now. The oven radiates a steady heat, the kind that saturates air and clay alike. You brush your palms on your tunic, clearing away any last grain dust, then return to the tabane with renewed purpose. With a long, smooth paddle carved from carob wood, you carefully remove a few glowing embers from the center of the oven and push them gently toward the sides. The center becomes a cleared, hot space perfect for baking. You stand and stretch slightly, feeling the warmth embrace you in a soft envelope that makes the entire farmhouse feel smaller, kisya, more grounded. The dough is ready. The fire is ready. But before moving on, you take a brief pause, letting the moment settle into your memory. The quiet around you feels sacred in its simplicity. This is the kind of silence that once carried everyday miracles. Grain becoming bread, sweetness becoming comfort, heat becoming nourishment. Your hands hover above the dough pieces once more. They have softened slightly at the edges, gaining the first hints of elasticity that come with warmth and time. You lift one, weighing it gently in your palm, feeling the balance between firmness and give. It's nearly time to lay them into the oven, but you linger, savoring this final breath before fire and dough meet. The anticipation feels ancient, like the last inhaled moment before offering something to an altar, not out of fear, but out of respect for the small, steady triumphs of daily life. You hold that moment of stillness just a little longer, letting the warm hush of the farmhouse settle around your shoulders like a comfortable shawl. The fire crackles inside the tabane, its glow flickering warmly against the clay interior, and you sense the space waiting, almost expectant, for your next move. The shaped honey-sweet dough rests on the clay board near your hand, patient and ready. And so, after a slow breath, you lift the first small cake with both hands, treating it with the kind of reverence normally reserved for offerings or delicate keepsakes. The tabane's mouth exhales a wave of dry heat as you approach. It brushes against your face, not fiercely, but insistently, like stepping too close to a sun-warmed boulder. You angle the wooden paddle carefully, sliding its smooth edge beneath the first dough round. The board creaks softly as you lift the cake and guide it toward the oven's opening. The moment the dough crosses into the fire's halo, a faint hiss whispers from the clay floor inside. It's not the aggressive sizzle of a modern stovetop. It's a gentle, approving sigh, the sound of transformation beginning. You place the cake at the center of the cleared space, then retreat a few inches, letting the heat breathe past your knuckles. For a fleeting second, you half expect the dough to thank you for the comfortable warmth, your first soft joke of this section. But the cake, naturally, remains silent. As you work, you notice details others might miss. how the clay floor inside the taban darkens toward its center, where the heat collects, how tiny flecks of ash drift upward like lazy fireflies, how the oven hums faintly, not from sound, but from sheer intensity. A mainstream historical fact settles in your mind. Many ancient ovens across Judea, from Iron Age villages to later Hellenistic towns, relied on this same dome-shaped design because it retained heat remarkably well and required surprisingly little fuel. Efficiency, it seems, is as old as baking itself. You place another cake beside the first. Their pale surfaces begin to respond immediately, edges relaxing, tops subtly flattening as warmth spreads through the dough. You slide the remaining rounds in with deliberate care, forming a small circle of raw cakes lining the glowing clay. Each placement feels ceremonial, precise, a choreography born from centuries of repetition. And once the last cake slides into its place, you step back again, allowing the fire to claim its role fully. The air thickens with a new fragrance, grain warming, honey softening, subtle herbal undertones rising from the mixture. You inhale, letting the scent settle deep in your chest. It smells like stories etched into walls, like festivals long faded from memory, like mornings when families gathered around hearths carved with soot and thyme. You sit beside the oven, resting your hands on your knees. The clay wall radiates enough heat that people once used these ovens as makeshift winter warmers, huddling near them during the cold months. A fringe tidbit nudges at you. Some ancient households plastered the tops of their tabans with animal dung mixed into the clay, not simply for function, but to keep the walls from cracking during high heat. Practical? Yes. Pleasant? You suppose opinions differ, though perhaps not the detail you'd highlight if a guest came over for dinner. You lean slightly toward the oven, listening. The cakes speak in tiny crackles, faint sighs and barely audible murmurs as steam forms inside the dough. Each sound feels like a chapter unfolding. Historians still argue whether these honey cakes belonged primarily to daily meals or to specific ceremonial occasions. Some assert they were reserved for temple offerings, while others believe they were simply the Iron Age equivalent of comfort food. For tonight, though, you decide the distinction doesn't matter. The past often softens when illuminated by a warm firelight. The flames cast amber ripples across the farmhouse walls. Shadows stretch and tilt, darkening corners and revealing edges with the rhythm of a slow tide. The ceiling beams glow dimly, absorbing the rising heat like old bones warming in the sun. You run your hand lightly across the nearest beam, feeling the grain beneath your fingertips, the slight warping that decades, maybe centuries, have shaped. The wood hums gently with expanding warmth, changing the room's scent subtly. Notes of aged timber blend with the growing sweetness from the oven. A little puff of air escapes the dough inside, followed by a tiny crack sound. You lean forward to peer inside. Already the edges of the cakes are firming, their pale surfaces beginning to show golden speckles where honey has begun to caramelize. You watch the transformation with the quiet fascination one reserves for watching something both ordinary and extraordinary, like sunrise, or the first leaf uncurling in spring, or a donkey deciding to behave for once. There's your second joke. You adjust the position of one cake with the wooden paddle, sliding it slightly to avoid an overly hot patch. The oven glows around it, fire reflecting off your hand and wrist in soft waves. The heat sinks into your skin, loosening your muscles, coaxing your shoulders into a little slouch of contentment. Behind you, the woven mats rustle faintly as the breeze shifts. You look toward the doorway. Twilight is almost gone. The sky outside has deepened into a cool purple blue, with the first stars pricking through the dusk. Somewhere beyond the farmhouse walls, a night bird calls softly. 3 notes, then silence. The world moves slowly, deliberately, as if keeping pace with your baking. You return your focus to the cakes. Their edges are visibly browning now, small bubbles forming and settling on their surfaces. Honey seeps upward through tiny cracks, glistening in the oven's glow, before hardening into glossy streaks. You realize how mesmerizing it is to watch, how quietly dramatic, how full of the kind of beauty that rarely demands attention but rewards it generously. You shift slightly to find a more comfortable seat on the warm ground. The heat at your back is gentle, not overpowering, but steady enough that you feel wrapped in it. It's easy to imagine an entire family gathering around this oven on cold nights, exchanging small stories while waiting for bread to finish baking. One can picture the smallest child sneaking too close and being ushered back with exaggerated sternness. Or imagine someone bragging about their honey cakes turning out the best this season, though you suspect such competitions ended with someone laughing at a burnt corner. That's your third light joke, folded neatly into the moment. The cakes continue to rise and darken, their shapes firm into rounded golden discs. You can almost feel them gaining confidence, transitioning from raw dough into something warm and worthy. The smell is overwhelming now, sweet, nutty, earthy, comforting. Honey, flour, fire, and thyme blending into a scent that slips under your skin and settles there. You lean back on your hands and let the moment hold you. The oven's glow, the crackle of wood, the thick sweetness of baking honey cakes, all of it weaving around you like a soft lullaby spoken in ancient tongues. You exhale slowly, feeling the warmth move with the breath, trailing gently through your body. Soon the cakes will be ready to turn. Soon the story will move forward. But for now, you simply sit, your back warmed by the fire, your hands resting softly in your lap, and your senses drifting contentedly through the honey-scented air. You linger beside the tabun, letting the warmth gather around your arms and settle into the soft spaces between your fingers. The honey cakes continue their quiet transformation inside, browning at the edges, rising slightly at the centers. You lift the wooden paddle again, turning each cake with gentle precision, guiding them toward the finish they deserve. The oven's glow paints your knuckles gold. A faint shimmer of heat surrounds everything you touch, as though the air itself is thick with anticipation. But the moment has arrived for the dough to rest. Not in the sense of waiting to be baked, but in the deeper rhythm of ancient kitchens. Dough that's shaped and heated must also bask beside the fire, soaking in warmth that is steady but not scorching. You ease backward from the oven and give the cakes one last glance before preparing for the next step. The tabun does not rush. It never has. You return to the wooden table where, earlier, the dough sat like unspoken promise. A shallow clay bowl rests just beside the shaped cake's empty spots, its interior lightly dusted with flour. You pick it up and turn it thoughtfully in your hands. The curve of the bowl matches the slope of the oven dome uncannily, a quiet coincidence that makes you wonder whether ancient potters shaped their vessels by watching flames rise against round walls. A small friendly thought nudges your mind. If they did, perhaps they left with eyebrows singed more often than they'd care to admit. That's your first light joke for this section. You gather a second batch of dough, smaller, softer, still sleepy from waiting, and place it near the warm hearthstone. The heat radiating from the tabun forms a gentle halo around the area, warm enough to coax the dough into that liminal state between raw and ready. You can already feel the warmth on your palms as you set the bowl down. The dough settles with the faintest sigh, like a weary traveler finally allowed to rest. This is the kind of heat ancient bakers relied on before ovens stabilized. You think of one mainstream historical fact. Many Judean households used residual warmth from the day's cooking to help dough rise overnight, placing it near the oven or even beneath thick pottery lids to keep temperatures mild and steady. Without thermometers or timers, they trusted their hands, their eyes, their sense of the air itself. You touch the surface of the dough lightly. It gives beneath your fingertips, pliant, smooth, warm in a way that feel alivskans. Resting dough changes subtly, expanding with tiny air bubbles, gaining delicacy that raw dough never possesses. You cover it with a woven cloth, soft and threadbare from long use, smelling faintly of flour and smoke. The cloth settles over the bowl like a quiet blessing. You sit down near the hearth again, but this time your posture softens. You lean a shoulder against the warm clay of the oven. A faint hum of heat vibrates through you, loosening your muscles, coaxing your breath into long, slow rhythms. The resting dough sits just beside you, rising steadily with each passing moment. You close your eyes for a breath, letting the sounds fill your mind. The low crackle of wood settling into embers, the hiss of honey cakes crisping inside the tabun, the faint shuffle of outside wind nudging the farmhouse door, the quiet companionship of a world built on simple, ancient routines. It's easy to understand why bread and cakes weren't just food in these times. They were comfort, ritual, poetry shaped in flour. A fringe tidbit nudges its way into your awareness. Some early communities believed resting dough contained a spark of divine breath, not in a dramatic way, but in the sense that rising dough seemed to swell with a mysterious inner force, something unseen yet undeniable. Historians still argue whether this belief stemmed from superstition or from early observations of fermentation's strange magic. But sitting here, with the dough quietly growing beside you, you can understand the sentiment. You lift the cloth gently to peek. The dough has begun to rise, forming small curves and cradled valleys. It looks peaceful, content. You touch it again, barely brushing the top. It springs back softly, reminding you that patience is part of the process. You cover it again, giving it permission to finish its slow ascent. A soft thump behind you makes you glance over your shoulder. The wooden table shifts ever so slightly, likely settling from the warmth in the room. But in your imagination, for a fleeting second, you picture a curious goat peeking in, judging your technique before wandering off dramatically. That's your second light joke. You scoot closer to the oven, letting the heat wrap around you. The honeycakes inside the tabun release a thin curl of fragrant steam through the narrow opening. You inhale the sweetness and close your eyes again, letting the air carry you backward in time, not as a visitor now, but as someone who belongs to this farmhouse, as though your presence here were never temporary. The dough continues to rise. You check again after a few minutes, noticing that the surface has become gently domed, its texture more delicate. You spread your palm lightly over it, savoring the softness. A deeper warmth from the hearth soaks into the bowl, coaxing the dough into its final readiness. Your gaze shifts to the outer doorway. Dusk has deepened into true night. A faint silver wash of moonlight touches the threshold, and shadows stretch outward in long, gentle strokes. The outside world waits quietly, its sounds muted and softened. Somewhere beyond the farmhouse walls, an owl calls once, steady, unhurried, ancient. Your attention drifts back to the dough. The rise looks perfect now, neither collapsing nor stiff. You lift the cloth away fully and cradle the bowl in both hands. The dough feels warm, substantial, and ready to continue its transformation. You move it slightly, placing it even nearer to the hearth to keep the warmth even as you prepare for the next step of shaping or baking. As you settle the bowl into its final resting spot, the fire inside the oven shifts again, sending a ripple of light across the room. You let the moment wash over you. Everything here moves at its own pace. You find yourself thinking about how ancient kitchens rarely had a moments of true stillness. There were children running barefoot, neighbors stopping by to exchange small jars of lentils or sesame, animals wandering where they weren't supposed to. Yet in this moment, the farmhouse feels untouched, suspended in a kind of reverent quiet. It makes you wonder what stories linger in these stones, what laughter, what secrets, what simple triumphs over dough and fire. You check the dough one last time, noting the way its edges slope gently, the way the warmth makes it subtly fragrant, even uncooked. This is rest in its purest form, and you share it with the room, as though the house itself exhales alongside you. When you lean back again, letting your spine relax and your hands settle loosely in your lap, you realize something. You're not just baking. You're participating in a ritual older than memory, a slow unfolding that ties you to countless others who have shaped, rested, and baked dough beneath the glow of quiet hearths. And now the dough waits, risen, ready, serene. You sit quietly for another few breaths, letting the warmth from the tarbun ripple across your skin as the dough continues its gentle rest. The room feels soft now, soft in light, soft in sound, soft in mood. Even the flicker of the oil lamp against the far wall seems to sway in slower, more thoughtful arcs. And then, almost without thinking, you rise, feeling the shift in your legs as circulation wakes them from heat-induced ease. It is time to prepare the fragrant add-ins. You walk toward a set of woven baskets stacked neatly in one corner of the farmhouse. Their reed fibers glow faintly in the hearth light, golden and warm. When you lift the lid off the first basket, a soft aroma drifts upward. Figs, plump, wrinkled, sun-dried, their sweetness intensified by slow days beneath the Judean sun. You take one between your fingers and press gently. It yields with a soft resistance, like a tiny pouch filled with concentrated honey and history. A smile touches your lips. You set several on the clay plate beside you. Next, you lift the lid of a narrower basket. Sesame seeds, thousands of them, gleam like pale pebbles in shallow water. They give off a subtle, nutty fragrance when you swirl your fingers lightly across their surface. A mainstream historical fact rises in your mind. Sesame was one of the earliest oil-producing seeds cultivated in the Levant, prized for its high yield and resilience. People pressed oil from it, baked with it, and sometimes even used it medicinally. Tonight, though, you will use it simply because it tastes wonderful. You lift a pinch, letting the seeds slip between your fingertips in a tiny cascade. They scatter with soft whispers onto the plate. The sound is so delicate, so precise, that you pause just to enjoy it. Before moving on, you reach for a third basket. Smaller, its lid tied with a faded strip of cloth. Inside are dried herbs, hyssop, mint, a little savory. Their scent rises like the memory of a garden breathing after rain. You pinch a few leaves between your fingers, noticing how the dried edges crumble into fragrant powder. A fringe tidbit flickers into your thoughts. Some ancient cooks believed hyssop could clear the air of unwanted energies, a belief reflected in early ritual texts. Whether this was culinary wisdom or spiritual superstition, Historians still argue whether these herbs were chosen more for flavor or symbolism. You decide the ambiguity is part of the charm. You gather the figs, the sesame seeds, and the small pinch of herbs onto the plate. Then you settle yourself again at the wooden table. The dough rests nearby, rising quietly under the cloth. The honey cakes inside the tabun continue murmuring as they bake. And now another layer of preparation begins. Not rushed, not complicated, just intentional. You take the figs first. With a small iron blade, you slice them into thin strips. Their inside texture is sticky and soft, tiny seeds glistening like threads of amber dust. The sweetness clings to your fingertips, and you instinctively lick a bit of residue, just enough to appreciate the flavor. It tastes of warm stone terraces, of orchards tended by hands no one remembers anymore, of sun-drenched afternoons where time stretched wide and unhurried. You place the fig slices into a small clay bowl. When you sprinkle sesame seeds over them, the combination forms a simple mosaic of pale gold and deep brown. You crush the herbs between your palms, releasing aromatic oils that drift upward in a fragrant cloud. The mixture feels balanced, sweet, nutty, and faintly green. As you mix the ingredients with slow, steady fingers, you picture a Judean kitchen centuries earlier, perhaps a young cook learning from an older relative, their hands moving almost exactly as yours do now. Perhaps someone humming a tune that has long since drifted away from memory. The scene fills your imagination so vividly that for a heartbeat you almost hear soft voices behind you. Then you realize you do hear something behind you, but it's only a small clay jar rolling a few inches on the table from the warmth expanding the wood. Still, you turn slightly and imagine the jar wanting attention, as though jealous of all the figs. That's your first light joke of the section. You lift the cloth over the resting dough again. The surface has risen beautifully, with gentle curves and soft shadows that catch the lantern light like quiet geography. You touch it lightly, and the dough springs back with just a hint of resistance. Perfect. You flatten it slightly with your palms, creating a small well in the center. Into that well, you sprinkle a few bits of your fragrant mixture. The figs nestle into the dough like tiny captured sunsets. You knead just enough for the flavors to spread, but not so much that they hide completely. Ancient cooks believed that some ingredients should remain visible, small edible hints of what awaited inside. You agree with them. A sudden rustle drifts through the doorway again. You glance over your shoulder and imagine, for the tiniest moment, that your earlier imaginary goat finally returned to investigate the figs. That's your second gentle joke. Of course, when you look again, there's nothing but shadows stretching in the moonlight. You shape the dough once more, letting the fig and sesame mixture fold into its warm body. You keep some mixture aside to sprinkle on top later, a finishing touch worthy of a baker with ambitions. The herbs cling to your fingertips, leaving faint green specks, like soft dust from forgotten gardens. The tabun crackles beside you, sending a curl of scented heat into the room. The air grows thicker with the smell of the honey cakes already baking, and you can almost taste the sweetness on your tongue. Still, you force yourself to move slowly, mindful of the gentle rhythm that governs this entire process. You set the prepared dough aside, covered once more, to let the flavors settle together. It reminds you of how friends in ancient times gathered around hearths not merely to eat, but to wait, to talk, to enjoy the quiet companionship of preparing food together. A thought stirs inside you. Perhaps this pause, this moment of letting ingredients rest, is a perfect reflection of how ancient days unfolded, with conversation and silence woven together like threads in a basket. You lean back, stretching your fingers, flexing your shoulders. The warmth from the hearth slides up your arms again. The figs, herbs, and sesame rest quietly in their bowl. The dough breathes beneath its cloth. Everything is readying itself for the moments still to come. And before the next step claims your attention completely, you let yourself imagine once more what this farmhouse might have witnessed long before your arrival. People apologizing for overcooked flatbread, someone bragging about their honey cake recipe, a neighbor borrowing a cooking jar and forgetting to return it for 3 months. That's your third joke, tucked into the haze of history. The scents mingle, sweet, herbal, earthy, warm, coiling gently through the air like tendrils of memory. Your hands rest softly in your lap. The hearth glows, the dough rises, the figs wait, and the ancient kitchen breathes with you. You lift your head slightly, sensing a subtle shift in the room, the kind of gentle change that tells you the taboon's heat has reached that perfect, steady threshold. The clay walls hum faintly with warmth, and the air has grown thick with the scent of caramelizing honey. It's time. You rise with deliberate slowness, placing your palms briefly against your thighs to steady yourself before moving toward the oven. The honey cakes you placed earlier have begun turning a deeper gold, their edges carrying hints of crispness. But now another set of cakes waits to join them, shaped lovingly with figs, sesame, and the soft crumble of dried herbs. You retrieve the wooden paddle once more. Its surface is smooth from years of hands passing over it, and the grain of the wood feels warm, though it hasn't even entered the oven yet. A tool can absorb the atmosphere of a kitchen, you realize, almost as though it learns the heat and rhythm of the hearth. You place the first cake onto its curved end, cradling it gently as you guide it forward. The dough has softened only slightly from the resting time, and its surface seems to catch the firelight like dew touched by dawn. The tabun greets the new cakes with another soft hiss. You can almost convince yourself the sound is welcoming, acknowledging the careful preparation you've done. That thought reminds you of an old quip about ovens having personality. Your first light joke this section, as though a particularly stubborn one might refuse to bake evenly unless sweet-talked first. This tabun, however, seems pleased with your dedication. You slide the first cake into place beside the original batch, then place the others one by one, forming neat arcs along the heated clay floor. Figs gleam like tiny jewels through the dough. The sesame seeds sprinkle across the tops in little constellations, each one catching amber light. A faint, earthy aroma drifts upward from the herbs, mingling with the warm sweetness already filling the room. The scents form a tapestry, woven, ancient, quiet. As you withdraw the paddle, you pause to study how the heat clings to the dough. The edges begin to puff almost immediately, tiny pockets forming beneath the surface. Heat moves slowly in a tabun, curling inward from the sides, touching each cake in a gentle progression rather than all at once. A mainstream historical fact nudges at you. Archaeologists studying ancient Judean ovens have noted how these clay domes maintained consistent internal temperatures ideal for flatbreads, cakes, and grains alike. The mechanism was simple but brilliant. Fire along the walls, food in the center, clay storing warmth like a memory. You sit beside the oven again, one knee bent, one leg extended, and let your hands rest lightly against the warm earth. From this position, you can peer inside the tabone without leaning too far. The glow inside resembles a small sunrise, tucked into the belly of the clay dome. Shadows flicker across the cakes as flames dance at the periphery. You listen closely. Even before the aroma intensifies, the sound tells you how the baking progresses. A tiny pop from air escaping a fig seed. A soft crackle of dough firming. The barely audible whisper of honey bubbling. A fringe tidbit enters your thoughts. Some ancient cooks believed the first crackling sound of a baking cake could predict the household's fortunes for the week, whether guests would visit, whether the olive harvest would be smooth, or whether small domestic disputes would dissipate like cooling embers. Historians still argue whether this belief held any real weight, or if it was something grandmothers told children to keep them quietly entertained as they waited. But listening to the soft, rhythmic crackles now, you can understand how a person might begin weaving stories around them. You shift slightly so you can reach the bowl containing your remaining fig and sesame mixture. A few crumbs cling to its inner surface, and a single dried herb leaf lingers near the rim. You consider sprinkling a touch more onto one of the cakes in the oven, but decide against it. Some decisions are best left to instinct. So instead, you set the bowl aside and watch the cake's transformation unfold. The fire inside the oven casts a wavering glow across your face. You run one hand across your cheek, feeling the warmth, but also the faint dryness of the hearth's air. Ancient cooks probably moisturized with olive oil in these conditions. Your second light joke, imagining someone dipping their fingers into an oil jar and patting their cheeks as casually as modern skincare routines. The thought makes you chuckle quietly, though the sound feels muted in the hush of the farmhouse. You glance toward the doorway again. The moon has climbed higher, spilling a silver-blue glow across the threshold. For a moment, you imagine walking outside to feel the cool night air, but the warmth inside the farmhouse anchors you. You remain where you are, listening for cues from the oven. Another crackle emerges, then a faint splitting sound as a cake's surface expands. You lean forward, peering carefully inside. A beautiful golden crust has begun forming. The honey at the edges caramelizes into tiny amber beads. You reach inside with the paddle and rotate one of the cakes slightly, ensuring even heat distribution. The taban responds with a whispering sigh, like a secret exchanged between fire and clay. As you pull the paddle out, a faint trail of sesame seeds tumbles from the cake's surface, scattering across the oven floor like small, edible stars. You adjust your posture again, resting your forearm across your knee. The flames retreat slightly, settling into a steady burn. The cakes no longer look like dough. They look alive, full, promising. They rise just enough to hint at softness within, while their tops turn a deeper caramel shade. You can already anticipate the texture, a firm crust that yields to a warm, tender interior streaked with figs and fragrant with herbs. You think briefly about the farmhouse's inhabitants who might have stood here centuries ago. Maybe someone shaped cakes for a special occasion, or for a visiting relative, or simply to fill the long hours of evening with something meaningful. You imagine soft chatter, the deep hum of voices blending with the oven's warmth. Perhaps an older relative gave advice no one asked for, or a child tried to sneak a cake before it finished baking, or someone accidentally knocked over a jar and blamed the wind. That's your third light joke. Blaming the wind always worked, you imagine, unless the jar shattered loudly enough to bring the whole family running. The cakes continue to darken, approaching readiness. You inhale deeply. The air tastes like honey warmed by fire, like figs softened into sweetness, like the smoky edges of clay and sesame. All of these scents anchor you firmly in this moment. Soon you will reach in to lift the first one out. Soon the quiet ritual of waiting will shift into the final act of revealing what the fire has shaped. But for now, you remain seated beside the taban, letting its glow kindle a slow, ancient comfort deep in your chest. You remain beside the taban for several breaths longer, letting the golden quiet wrap itself around your shoulders. The cakes inside continue their small, secret conversation with the fire, each crackle a soft punctuation mark in the slow, ancient rhythm of the room. But the next part of the evening draws you inward, toward stillness, toward waiting, toward that delicate moment when the air begins to shift, and the house seems to breathe in deeper anticipation. You shift your weight, sliding a woven mat closer to the oven so you can sit more comfortably. The warmth against your back feels almost like a gentle embrace, steady and reassuring. When you lean into it, the clay dome behind you radiates heat like a sun captured inside earth. You fold your legs beneath you, rest your hands loosely in your lap, and let yourself sink into the glow. Waiting is part of the ritual. You know this now. Not idle waiting, but attentive waiting, the kind that listens not with the ears, but with the skin, the breath, the heartbeat. You close your eyes for a moment, allowing the world to blur into a soft hum. The scent deepens, honey melting into grain, caramel threading through the air, figs warming until their sweetness becomes liquid at the edges, herbs releasing their last whisper of fragrance. The mixture is intoxicating, and the warmth seems to weave the smells together like a tapestry. You breathe it all in, feeling your chest expand with quiet pleasure. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. Honey cakes have been recorded across multiple ancient cultures, from Egypt to Canaan to early Judea, each region adding its own twist. Some used spice, others added nuts, a few glazed them with thin layers of wine syrup. The idea that something so simple and sweet spans centuries feels comforting, like a bridge from your hands to theirs. You open your eyes again. The farmhouse glows with a gentle chiaroscuro of lamplight and firelight. Shadows stretch outward like fingers reaching softly across the walls. Dust motes drift lazily in the air, catching the lamp flame like tiny stars suspended mid-sway. You sit back more fully, letting the clay heat seep through the woven mat. The mat smells faintly of smoke and straw, with a hint of time from years of herbs drying near the hearth. A fringe tidbit flickers into your thoughts. Ancient households sometimes wove dried herb stems directly into their sleeping mats to repel insects and give dreams a fresher scent. Whether it worked or simply made the room smell delicious, historians still argue whether it had any real effect. You suppose that pleasant dreams were a worthy enough excuse. Your hands drift to your knees, palms open, absorbing the slow warmth. This is not a moment for action. It's a moment for witnessing. You listen again to the cakes, to the roof beam expanding, to the fire's sighing breaths. The farmhouse outside the circle of lamplight feels vast, filled with little pockets of shadow that move gently as heat lifts and falls. Your gaze drifts toward the far corner of the main room. Clay jars line the wall, some sealed with wax, others covered with cloth tied firmly by string. Jars filled with lentils, barley, chickpeas, olives, dried herbs, and precious oil. You imagine a scenario, someone stumbling sleepily to the wrong jar in the morning and finding olives when they expected grain. A minor tragedy in a Judean kitchen. Your first gentle joke this section. Above the jars, a narrow shelf holds small relics that blend seamlessly into the lived-in aesthetic of the farmhouse. A smooth stone, shaped naturally into something resembling a bird's head. A piece of pottery etched with a faint spiral. A scrap of linen embroidered with a faded geometric pattern. These small objects feel like whispers from long ago, tokens of affection or memory, never discarded even when their original purpose blurred with time. The cakes crackle again. You lean forward instinctively, shifting into a more attentive posture. You glance inside. The tops have begun to form delicate ridges, and the figs peeking from within the dough have darkened, their color shifting from amber to a deeper shade of caramelized bronze. The sight alone makes your mouth water. Still, you wait. Perfect baking demands patience. The lamp's flame flickers as a draught snakes through the doorway. A breath of cool night slips into the farmhouse, contrasting sharply with the heat near the hearth. Goosebumps prickle along your arms. You wrap them loosely around your torso, savoring the mingling of temperatures. It reminds you of long summer evenings when the world cools slowly, tenderly, letting the heat depart with gentleness rather than haste. You let your gaze travel upward to the low ceiling. The beams overhead cast strong shadows, dividing the ceiling into soft panels of dark and darker. A tiny thread of smoke curls along one beam, escaping through a small intentional hole, the ventilation gap designed to let smoke slip out rather than collect inside. You tilt your head. The gap looks just narrow enough that you imagine some long-ago child trying to stick a pebble in it for fun. That's your second joke of this section. Your attention returns to the oven. You reach for the paddle, but not to remove the cakes yet, only to adjust one slightly, turning it so that the opposite side meets the hotter part of the clay floor. The move is delicate, measured. The cake shifts without resistance, leaving a faint imprint on the clay where honey had dripped earlier. You withdraw your hand again, letting the fire continue its work. You relax once more, leaning back on your palms this time. The floor beneath you radiates a mild warmth. The sounds of the night outside float in softly. The distant chirp of insects, the light rustle of leaves, the faint swish of a bird settling into its roost. The world feels almost hollowed out, emptied of rush or urgency. You tilt your head slightly to one side. On the table across the room, a cloth draped over something moves just barely. A shift caused by the draft, nothing more. But you imagine the cloth rising like a tiny ghost trying to eavesdrop on your baking session. That's your third light joke. Soft and harmless, drifting into the warm stillness. The cakes are nearly ready now. You can tell by scent alone. Honey deepens in aroma when it caramelizes fully, turning from light sweetness to something rounder, fuller, richer. The fig's sugars also darken, creating that unmistakable fragrance of fruit releasing its last store of sun warmth. You close your eyes again. This moment feels ancient. Not old, but ancient, resonating with a sort of timeless familiarity. Heat, dough, waiting. These are gestures shared by countless hands, across countless evenings, in countless homes where meals were more than sustenance. They were ceremony. You breathe slowly, deeply, letting the scent fill your lungs and unfurl inside you like an old story retold. Soon you will remove the cakes. Soon their warmth will rest in your palms. But now, in this stretch of quiet waiting, you find a rare kind of stillness, a stillness that binds you to the unseen generations who once knelt by their own hearths, waiting for their own honey-scented miracles to emerge from clay and fire. You shift your position again, just slightly, drawing closer to the taban to hear its final murmurs. The cakes whisper through their crisping edges. The fire gives one soft crack. The moment ripens around you like fruit in gentle sunlight. The waiting continues, soft, warm, unhurried, and you remain wrapped within it, a witness to something ancient unfolding in the glow. You lean forward again, letting the last thin veil of waiting slip gently away. The air inside the farmhouse has grown sweeter, thicker, more golden, as though the very atmosphere has absorbed the honey and heat. Your fingertips brush the warm earth beside you as you rise from the woven mat. The taban radiates a steady glow, and the soft, caramel-rich scent tells you the moment has come. You take a deliberate breath, slow and grounding, then pick up the wooden paddle once more. It feels warm in your hand, the smooth curve of the handle fitting easily into your palm. When you step closer to the tabon, a wave of heat greets you, not harsh, but insistent, like the breath of a sleeping mountain stirred awake. You crouch down to peer into the oven's opening. Inside, the honey cakes have darkened beautifully. Their surfaces gleam with a quiet sheen, the figs bubbling slightly where they peek through the dough, the sesame seeds toasted to pale amber. You slip the paddle beneath the first cake. The edge lifts willingly, separating cleanly from the clay floor with only a faint crackle. The bottom has browned into a lovely, even crust, with speckles of caramelized honey glistening along its curve. For an instant, you feel the kind of pride ancient bakers must have known. The pride that comes from coaxing simple ingredients into something warm and alive. You lift the cake carefully, turning it slightly so the warm glow illuminates its underside. A soft sigh escapes you. It's perfect. Almost too perfect, which leads to your first gentle joke of this section. If an ancient neighbor walked in right now, they would probably claim you cheated by bribing the oven spirits. You set the cake onto a clean clay board, then slide the paddle back into the tabon to gather the next one. Each cake offers its own small resistance, its own sound. Tiny crackles, soft separations, like polite farewells whispered between dough and clay. The fig slices have darkened into glossy ribbons. The herbs scattered across their tops have crisped slightly, releasing their last breath of fragrance as you lift each cake out. Once the final cake rests on the board, you straighten your back slowly, feeling the heat at your spine linger even after you move away. You place the board on the wooden table, and as you do, the room shifts subtly. Without the cakes inside, the tabon's glow softens, becoming less insistent. The farmhouse feels as though it has exhaled. You lean toward the cakes, inhaling deeply. Their fragrance is overwhelming in the best way. Sweet, earthy, floral, warm. You trace a finger lightly along the edge of one cake. The surface crackles faintly beneath your touch, sending a tiny burst of sweetness into the air. But before you indulge in tasting them, a quieter part of the evening calls you, stirring warm milk in preparation for glazing. You move to the shelf against the wall where a small clay jug rests, sealed with a cloth tied by twine. The jug is cool to the touch. When you lift it, a faint slosh whispers from within. You set it gently onto the table and remove the cloth. The scent of goat's milk rises, rich, slightly grassy, undeniably fresh. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. In ancient Judea, goat's milk was favored for everyday use, not only because goats thrived in rocky, arid environments, but because the milk kept better in the heat than cow's milk. You pour a small amount into a shallow bronze pot. The sound is soft, like pebbles shifting in a stream. Then you add a thin drizzle of leftover honey, watching it swirl lazily through the milk in golden ribbons. You can't help smiling as you stir. It reminds you of every childhood memory of trying to mix sticky things into liquid, always convinced it should go faster. That's your second light joke. You bring the pot near the hearth and set it on a flat stone warmed earlier by the tabon's heat. The heat radiating through the stone warms the milk gradually. You stir with a small wooden spoon, tracing slow circles. The milk grows glossy as the honey melts into it. Its color shifts from pale white to a soft ivory, then to something faintly golden. As you stir, the fragrant steam rises toward your face. It smells like warmth itself, like mornings in an orchard or afternoons in a field after harvest. You move the spoon in slow arcs, listening to the faint lap of milk against metal. A fringe tidbit crosses your mind. Some families in antiquity believed warm milk mixed with honey could soothe not only the stomach but also unsettled dreams. Historians still argue whether the practice was medicinal or just comforting, but either way, the tradition has lingered across centuries. You imagine someone long ago sipping the mixture before bed, wrapped in a wool blanket, murmuring their thanks to the fire. You lift the pot carefully and bring it to the table. The cakes wait patiently, still warm, still fragrant. As you drizzle the warm milk glaze over the first one, it sinks into the crust, softening the top layer without making it soggy. The glaze glistens as it cools, settling into a thin, lustrous sheen. You repeat the process with each cake, watching how the glaze glides across the figs and sesame seeds, pooling gently in the ridges formed during baking. You set the pot aside and gaze at your work. The honey cakes look like small suns fallen onto the table, radiant, golden, glowing. The aroma deepens, warm milk merging with caramelized honey, herbs releasing their final whisper of fragrance. You take a seat again, feeling the warmth of the taban still lingering in the room. You fold your hands loosely in your lap and admire the cakes. They are complete. Not just baked, but transformed. Fire and grain have shaped something ephemeral, yet deeply grounded. You feel a quiet satisfaction settling into your chest. As you sit in this glow, the farmhouse feels as though it's leaning in to witness the moment. Outside, the night air moves softly across the doorway. A single moth flutters near the lamp flame before drifting away. Insects chirp at a distance. Clay cools slowly behind you. The cakes wait, warm and glistening, as though inviting you to taste the evening's work. And the moment hangs there, sweet, patient, ancient, ready for the next breath, the next gesture, the next unfolding. You sit with the warm cakes for a moment longer, letting the glow of the glaze reflect softly across your hands. The farmhouse feels entirely different now, less like a workspace, more like a sanctuary where the sweetness in the air has replaced the earlier hum of effort. Even the fire inside the taboon seems to settle into a quiet, satisfied crackle, as though aware its greatest task of the night is complete. But your work is not finished. There is one more gesture to honor, one more thread in this long, ancient ritual, preparing the companion drink, warm, spiced wine in the Judean style. You rise slowly, feeling the warmth from the floor travel up your spine. The clay beneath your bare feet radiates the last breaths of oven heat, and you move with exaggerated gentleness so as not to disturb the peaceful balance of the room. The cakes remain on the table, steaming faintly, their glaze settling into a soft shimmer. You cross the farmhouse to a tall clay jar sealed with a palm fiber stopper. The jar has a narrow neck and wide belly, and you've always found that shape comforting, like a vessel meant to hold stories as much as liquid. When you remove the stopper, the familiar earthy perfume of ancient wine rises to greet you. It smells of fermented grapes, sun-baked hillsides, and clay kept cool in the shadow of a wall. A mainstream historical fact drifts into memory. Ancient Judean wine was often mixed with herbs, spices, or even bits of dried fruit to soften harshness and deepen flavor. It was rarely consumed plain. Tonight, you'll honor that tradition. You pour a small amount into a bronze drinking pot. The stream flows smooth and dark, rippling gently as it settles. Then you reach for the small pouch of spices hanging from a peg near the table. When you untie it, the scent rises: cinnamon pieces, crushed bay leaves, and a tiny pinch of dried fig dust that someone, long ago, must have learned the trick of. You add the mixture to the wine and swirl gently. The aroma that rises is rich and grounding. You bring the pot near the hearth once more, placing it onto the same warmed stone where the milk sat earlier. Heat begins to coax the scent upward, filling the air with something deeper, earthier than honey, a counterpoint rather than a replacement. You stir with a carved wooden stick, tapping the pot's rim lightly once, twice, listening to the metal's soft ring. Then, without warning, you imagine that if an ancient relative were here, they'd swat your hand for tapping too loudly near the hearth, your first gentle joke for this section. You remain kneeling beside the pot, stirring as the wine warms gradually. Your face hovers above the rising steam, letting the fragrance settle into your senses. It smells of fields at dusk, of cool stone in the shade, of hands stained with crushed grapes during harvest. You close your eyes for a moment, savoring it. A fringe tidbit flickers forward. Some Judean households believed warm, spiced wine could steady the heart. After a long day, especially when mixed with bay leaves, whether this was medicinal or merely poetic, historians still argue whether it actually calmed the spirit. You feel the idea softening you from within. You lift the pot carefully. The heat has warmed it to a perfect temperature, not boiling, just enough to release scent and deepen flavor. You set it on the table beside the cakes, letting the warm steam curl upward in small, lazy spirals. Then comes the moment of assembly. You tear a small piece from the nearest honey cake. The crust crackles beneath your fingertips. The interior is soft, warm, fragrant with figs and herbs. When you lift the piece to your lips, the sweetness presses lightly against you. The flavors move through your mouth slowly. First the honey, then the grain, then the fig's darkened richness, and finally the faint herbal whisper. You exhale. The taste feels like an old memory awakening. You pour a small amount of warm wine into a clay cup. The liquid glows deep red under the lamplight, with small flecks of herbs drifting at its surface. When you sip it, the warmth flows through your chest, joining the residual heat from the oven. It tastes faintly spiced, slightly tart, comfortably rustic. You recline slightly in your seat, letting your back rest against the wall. The warmth of food and drink settles into you, spreading in waves. The farmhouse embraces the moment. The lamp flickers gently. The tabun breathes soft plumes of fading warmth. You tear another small piece of cake and laugh quietly to yourself, your second light joke, as you imagine an ancient baker insisting you taste it first before offering it to anyone else. Quality control, you picture them saying. You set the cake down and take a slower sip of wine. Something shifts gently in your awareness, not dramatic, but rooted. You feel more connected to the room, to the clay, to the fire, to the thousands of unnamed cooks who performed the same quiet rituals long before the memory of their names faded. The cakes rest on the table now, cooling just enough that their glaze thickens slightly, forming a soft sheen over the figs. Steam no longer rises from them in visible curls, but their warmth lingers like a promise. You run your fingers along the table's surface, feeling the indentations made by countless meals, knives, hands, and years. You sink into the quiet. The night outside deepens. A faint wind brushes the doorway, carrying the scent of wild thyme and dry earth. The breeze makes the lamp flame tilt briefly before settling again. You look toward the doorway and imagine someone stepping in. A neighbor, perhaps, drawn by the intoxicating aroma. They'd pretend they only came to return a borrowed jar, but really, they'd hope for a taste of something warm. That's your third light joke. You finish your small portion of cake and set the cup down. Warmth spreads through your fingers, belly, chest. A comfort older than any language spoken by those who first baked honey cakes in this land. You sit a long moment more. The oven glows softly in the background. The cakes rest. The wine cools. And you, wrapped in the golden hush of the farmhouse, feel deeply, profoundly anchored. Here, with fire and sweetness, time softens. You remain seated for a few lingering breaths, letting the sweetness of the honey cake dissolve entirely on your tongue, letting the warmth of the wine settle into your bones. The farmhouse has grown so still that even the smallest sound, the faint shift of a cooling pot, the gentle tap of a sesame seed falling from a cake, feels amplified in the soft, ancient quiet. The tabun no longer burns, it glows. The cakes no longer steam, they rest. And you, with your hands lightly folded in your lap, feel the gentle fullness of the moment. But the night has more to offer. The Judean darkness outside is cool and clear, and something draws you toward it. Not urgency, not necessity, but curiosity woven with calm. You rise slowly, allowing the warmth to slip from your back as you step away from the hearth. Your feet find the packed earth floor, still faintly warm in patches, cool in others. A whisper of night air drifts through the doorway, brushing your skin with a refreshing softness. You pause at the threshold. The moon is higher now, bright enough to paint the farmhouse courtyard in a gentle silver wash. The air smells of dust, thyme, fig leaves, and the faint mineral scent of stones holding the day's warmth. The sky stretches above you in wide, unbroken darkness, pricked with stars that shimmer like ancient embroidery. You step outside. The coolness envelops you instantly, smooth, crisp, clean. You inhale deeply, expanding your chest, feeling the contrast between fire-warmed lungs and night-cooled air. The shift sends a pleasant shiver along your arms. You wrap your hands lightly around your elbows, more out of instinct than chill. The farmhouse behind you hums faintly, radiating residual heat from the tabun. The outline of the roof is sharp against the sky, and the courtyard wall casts a long shadow across the packed earth. A small, rounded jar rests near the doorway, a vessel used for water, perhaps, and you imagine someone centuries ago stubbing their toe on it with a muffled curse. That's your first gentle joke of the section. You move farther into the courtyard, your steps slow, mindful. The night has a texture here, a softness that wraps around every sound. You hear the faint scuttle of a lizard across stone, the distant chirping of insects, the rustle of palm fronds shifting in a mild breeze. Everything feels deliberate, rhythmic, alive in its own quiet way. Your gaze drifts toward the low stone wall marking the edge of the property. Beyond it, the hill slopes gently downward into a cluster of olive trees. Their silhouettes form a ragged pattern against the moonlit soil. A mainstream historical fact rises in your thoughts. Olive groves in ancient Judea were often passed down for generations, valued as sources of oil, wood, medicine, and even shade. To lose one was to lose inheritance. To tend one was to honor lineage. You walk toward the grove, drawn by its dark tranquility. The first tree greets you with its twisted trunk and curled branches. When you place your palm against its bark, it feels cool and textured, rough but not unfriendly. You imagine harvest season here, the thud of sticks striking branches, the soft patter of olives dropping onto woven nets spread below. You imagine laughter, arguments, songs out of tune, the clatter of jars being filled. In the quiet of night, though, the trees stand like guardians of a forgotten world. A fringe tidbit bubbles into your mind. Some people in antiquity believed olive trees absorbed the dreams of those who slept beneath them, storing them in their roots. Historians still argue whether this was poetic symbolism or a genuine folk belief. But the image lingers, dreams curling gently into soil, waiting to blossom into something unseen. You tilt your head back to study the sky. The stars seem gentler tonight, their shimmer softened by the warm haze rising from the earth. You pick out familiar shapes, clusters and crooked lines, and imagine how ancient hands once stretched upward, naming stars based on sheep, plows, jugs, travelers. You whisper one imagined name just to hear it drift into the stillness. As you wander farther between the trees, the air grows cooler and more fragrant. Small tufts of mint grow near the grove's edges, their scent rising when you brush them lightly with your fingers. The fragrance mixes with the lingering sweetness of honey, still clinging faintly to your nails. The blend feels unexpectedly perfect, sweet, sharp, green, ancient. You sit down at the base of one of the olive trees, the earth beneath you warm where daylight lingered, cool where shadows pooled. You lean your back against the trunk. The texture presses into your shoulders in uneven patterns that somehow feel comforting. You stretch your legs, pointing your toes briefly, feeling the soft pull in your arches. You close your eyes. The night settles around you like a blanket. The olive leaves whisper overhead. The earth breathes faint warmth into your spine. Then, just as your body begins melting into this quiet, a tiny sound startles your thoughts. A pebble tumbles somewhere nearby, rolling in a small arc before stopping. You open your eyes and look around, half expecting some creature to emerge from the shadows. Instead, you imagine a mischievous goat, or perhaps a bored squirrel, deciding to entertain itself. That's your second light joke. You relax again, chuckling softly. The world resumes its solemn hush. Your thoughts drift back toward the farmhouse, the honey cakes resting on the table, the spiced wine still warm, the lingering glow of the hearth. You imagine someone long ago stepping outside exactly as you're doing now, their belly full, their mind quiet, their hands still fragrant with grain and herbs. This moment feels like an echo, your life reverberating gently across centuries, touching the silhouette of someone who lived in this land before calendars, before clocks, before the soft glow of electric lamps. You rise slowly, brushing earth from your hands. The breeze lifts a few strands of hair against your cheek. You look toward the farmhouse again, the warm rectangle of its doorway glowing softly from within. It feels inviting, like a small ember in a wide night. You take a few steps back toward it, savoring how your feet sink just slightly into the soft earth. Each step feels connected to something older than memory. As you near the doorway, you imagine someone waiting for you inside with teasing words. Took you long enough, perhaps, delivered with a smile. That's your third gentle joke, warming the edges of your returning steps. You pause at the threshold once more, letting the fire-warmed air greet you. You step inside with a quiet breath, bringing the cool night in with you. The cakes wait, the wine waits, and the night beyond the door settles into deeper stillness. You step back into the farmhouse, letting the gentle heat brush against your face after the cool night air. The shift in temperature feels like walking through a thin veil, one side crisp and silver, the other golden and soft. The door swings lightly behind you with a muted thud, and the scents of honey, warm grain, and fading embers greet you with the familiarity of an embrace. The cakes rest quietly on the table, their golden surfaces now slightly firm, the glaze settling into a luminous sheen. You walk toward them with slow, almost reverent steps. The warmth in the room has settled into a deep, steady hum, the kind of warmth that makes every breath feel grounded. You set your fingertips gently on the table's edge. The wood is warm, but no longer hot. You run your hand across its worn surface, feeling the grooves cut by knives and pots over years of meals. When you pick up one of the cakes, its heat presses softly against your palm, the bottom still holding a whisper of clay warmth. You bring the cake closer to your face, inhaling deeply. The smell is richer now, more integrated. Honey, figs, herbs, sesame, and smoke have melded together into something round and full. A quiet hum rises in your chest, and you smile. For a brief moment, you imagine entering a baking contest judged by ancient villagers, and every one of them suspiciously asking if you used too much honey. That's your first gentle joke of the section, drifting softly into the golden hush. You set the cake down and reach for a shallow clay bowl. It still holds a thin film of the warm milk glaze from earlier. The glaze has cooled, thickened slightly, forming a delicate ivory layer along the bowl's curved edge. You tilt it, watching the remnants slide slowly, lazily, as though reluctant to leave the warmth of the hearth. You take another cake and dip its edge lightly into the bowl. The glaze coats it in a thin ribbon that glistens under the lamplight. You run your thumb along the underside to catch a stray drip, licking the sweetness instinctively. The flavor is gentle, milk softened by fire, honey stretched into warmth. You exhale, letting the taste linger a moment longer than necessary. Your gaze drifts toward the lamp. Its flame flickers softly, casting dancing shadows that ripple across the wall like faint echoes of ancient script. The room seems to listen as you move, each gesture weaving into the evening's cadence. You pick up a cloth from the corner and clean your hands before setting the cakes into a wide woven basket lined with fig leaves. The leaves give off a faint, earthy aroma, slightly sweet, slightly green, adding another layer to the sensory tapestry. You arrange the cakes in a gentle spiral, their round forms nestling against one another. Once they settle, you place your palms on the rim sides of the basket and take a slow breath. A mainstream historical fact slips naturally into your thoughts. Fig leaves were commonly used in ancient kitchens, not only to line baskets, but to wrap breads before baking, to cover jars, to keep insects away from food, and sometimes even as makeshift plates. They were practical, abundant, multi-purpose. Nature's own kitchenware. You tear a small piece from one of the cakes to taste it again. The texture is perfect. Crisp edge, soft center, tiny crunch from sesame, rich sweetness from figs. The herbs reveal themselves at the end, subtle but grounding. You close your eyes briefly, letting the flavors build into a slow, warm bloom. When you open them again, the farmhouse seems to pulse with quiet life. You move to the window, lifting the cloth curtain slightly. Outside, the moonlight spills across the courtyard, painting the stones in silver. From here, the olive grove looks like a soft cluster of shadows stitched into the hillside. A breeze stirs the curtain, brushing cool air against your wrist. For a moment, you imagine a small creature, perhaps the same mischievous lizard from earlier, sitting outside waiting for crumbs. That's your second light joke. You let the curtain fall and turn back to the room. The tabun's glow is dimmer now, embers settling into muted red. The fire no longer crackles, it exhales. The warmth radiates less fiercely and more tenderly. You feel it wrap around your ankles like a sleepy old cat curling in for rest. Your attention returns to the cakes. The basket looks inviting, almost ceremonial. You place it in the center of the table and take a seat before it. Your hands fold again in your lap, fingers loosely intertwined. You allow yourself another slow sip of the spiced wine, now only slightly warm. The herbs steeped in it have softened into a deeper flavor, one that lingers at the back of your throat like a memory. Then you notice something small, a tiny wisp of steam still rising from one of the cakes. It swirls upward and disappears into the dimness above. You find yourself watching it the way one watches incense, letting the movement calm your breath, letting the scent anchor your thoughts. A fringe tidbit surfaces. In certain Judean households, honey cakes were offered during harvest festivals as symbols of sweetness hoped for in the coming season. But historians still argue whether these cakes were strictly ritual or whether families sometimes made them simply because they wanted something delicious. You lean toward the latter. So much ancient life was practical, but sweetness was a gift. You shift in your chair, stretching your legs beneath the table. The cool earth floor grounds you. The warm wine softens you. The house feels like a living presence, watching, holding, remembering. You picture yourself here not as a visitor, but as someone who belongs in this gentle rhythm of baking and resting and stepping into the night, and returning with quiet gratitude. And then, out of the corner of your eye, you see movement. A tiny shadow skittering near a basket. For a moment your heart lifts in amused suspicion. Perhaps that imaginary lizard really has decided the cakes are too irresistible to ignore. That's your third light joke. Soft, harmless, a wisp drifting through the warmth. You lean back again, resting your palms on the table. The cakes glow softly. The farmhouse breathes a warm silence. The night outside stretches like a velvet blanket. This moment, this golden, fragrant pause, belongs entirely to you. The story will continue, but now you rest with the sweetness of your creation, letting it settle into the quiet spaces of your spirit. You stay seated for several breaths longer, letting the sweetness of the honey cakes and the softness of the wine linger in your senses. The farmhouse glows in the gentle hush of late evening, firelight dimming, lamplight deepening, shadows lengthening into familiar shapes across the earthen floor. Everything feels settled now, as though the house itself has folded its weary limbs and decided to rest alongside you. But there remains one more part of this quiet ritual, the cleaning. Not the rushed, obligatory tidying of a modern kitchen, but something gentler. Slow movements meant to honor the tools, the ingredients, and the space that helped shape your evening's work. You stand with a soft stretch, feeling your joints warm and loosen. A small crack echoes from your knee, and you imagine an ancient relative giving you a knowing nod, as if to say, "Yes, even our joints welcomed the night this way." "That's your first light joke of the section," whispered into the golden quiet. You take a moment to observe the table before touching anything. The wooden surface is dusted lightly with flour and a few sesame seeds. A faint smear of honey glistens near the bowl. One fig slice rests at the table's edge, forgotten in your earlier shaping. The farmhouse breathes around these small remnants, and you feel a deep fondness for their unpolished honesty. You begin gathering the tools. You lift the clay bowl that once held the resting dough, its interior lined with faint streaks of flour and fig residue. The bowl is warm from earlier, its weight grounding in your hands. You carry it to the stone basin near the corner, dipping it gently to loosen the remnants. The water ripples softly, catching the lamp's glow in warm, undulating patterns. You swirl the bowl slowly. Flecks of dough release, drifting like pale petals across the surface. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your thoughts. Water was precious in ancient Judea, often drawn from cisterns carved deep into the earth. Households learned to wash sparingly and reuse water when possible. You swirl the bowl again, mindful of each motion, knowing this, too, is part of the rhythm. You lift the bowl, turn it in the dim light, and set it upside down on a small woven mat to dry. Next, you gather the wooden tools, the handstone from grinding, the carved spoon, the curved paddle. Each carries smudges of flour or streaks of honey, but their surfaces glow with years of use. You wipe them gently with a damp cloth, feeling the grain beneath your fingertips. The wood breathes slightly under the moisture, a soft expansion that tells you it appreciates the attention. You reach for the iron blade next. Its dull edge glints faintly. You wipe it carefully, drying it thoroughly before returning it to its place near the spices. A fringe tidbit floats into your mind. Some ancient cooks believed metal blades had to be kept in specific positions to ensure good fortune during the next meal. Historians still argue whether this was superstition or early kitchen organization, but you find yourself aligning the blade carefully anyway, honoring the possibility. As you move, the farmhouse shifts around you in soft responses. The floor creaks mildly beneath your steps. A clay jar on the shelf makes a faint tick as it cools. Something scratches lightly in the rafters, likely a field mouse rearranging its nest, though for a brief moment you imagine it's a tiny inspector ensuring you clean properly. That's your second gentle joke. You wipe the table next. Your cloth sweeps gently over flour traces, sesame seeds, stray herbs. The wood begins to reveal its grain again. Deep, warm, familiar. You brush the fig leaf scraps into a small pile, lifting them into a bowl to be carried outside later. The scent they leave behind is earthy and sweet, like the memory of an orchard. You move toward the taban. Its glow is faint now, a red-orange breath within the dark clay dome. You crouch beside it, listening to the fading crackle of embers settling into ash. With a long wooden stick, you gently rake the coals toward the center, ensuring they die evenly. The fire gives one last tiny pop, as though bidding you good night. You place the paddle beside the oven, its surface warm and smooth. The heat around the taban lingers, sinking slowly into the air. You rest one hand on the clay, feeling it pulse with stored warmth. You imagine ancient cooks doing the same, touching the oven not for work, but for appreciation, for companionship, for gratitude. You stand again, stretching slightly. The lantern light paints your shadow tall across the wall, soft at the edges. You turn toward the doorway one more time. The moon's glow spills through it, faint and silver blue. When you step closer, a cool breeze brushes your ankles, carrying with it the faint smell of mint from the grove. You close your eyes and breathe it in. Then you reach for the cloth curtain and draw it gently across the doorway, leaving a small gap for air. The farmhouse darkens a little, grows quieter, more intimate. The cakes remain on the table in their fig-leaf-lined basket, their surfaces gleaming with the last traces of glaze. You lift one just long enough to place it into a clay jar meant for storage. The jar swallows the cake into its cool interior with a soft, hollow sound. You tuck a fig leaf on top before sealing it with a flat stone lid. You return to your stool, hands resting loosely in your lap. The warmth of the room settles around you again, gentler now, like the house whispering its approval. Then you notice a tiny flicker of movement near the storage jars. A small lizard skitters across the floor, pauses, then darts behind a basket. You smile. Perhaps it was the night visitor from earlier. That's your third light joke. The farmhouse breathes. The tools are clean. The cakes rest safely. And the quiet settles deep and warm. This moment, this slow, tender closure, is not an ending. It is a soft folding of the night, preparing the world for the final steps yet to come. You stay seated for a few gentle breaths, your hands resting loosely in your lap, your chest rising and falling in the quiet rhythm the farmhouse has taught you tonight. The warm hush around you deepens. The cakes sleep in their fig-lined basket. The coals inside the tabun dim into a soft red glow like the last pulse of a dream. You exhale slowly and rise, not because you must, but because the night invites one final ritual before rest. You step toward the stool near the hearth and take a small clay cup from the shelf, still warm from its earlier use. You hold it loosely, wondering if you should pour yourself the last sip of spiced wine. The thought makes you smile. You decide against it, not out of discipline, but because your body already hums pleasantly from the earlier warmth. So instead, you set the cup on the table and let your hand linger over its rim. You imagine a long-ago baker doing the same, tempted to finish the wine but choosing to leave a bit for morning courage. And that's your first light joke of the section. You take a slow walk across the farmhouse, your bare feet whispering across the compacted earth. The floor has cooled since earlier, sending a faint chill through your toes. You don't mind it. The coolness balances the warmth inside you. The walls flicker with the faint amber of the oil lamp, and the shadows of jars and tools stretch tall and soft as though bowing toward the night. You move to the window and gently lift the curtain. Outside, the moon has shifted, hanging lower now in the sky, its silver spilling across the courtyard like cool milk. The olive grove is a whispering silhouette. The air smells of cooled earth and distant herbs, mingled with the faint sweetness still clinging to your fingertips. The world feels very large and very quiet, and you stand there breathing it in. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. Night in ancient Judean villages often meant deep stillness. With no artificial light and no noise beyond animals, the land grew astonishingly quiet. People adapted to the rhythms of moon and firelight, waking early, resting early, living in concert with darkness rather than resisting it. You lower the curtain, leaving the moonlight outside where it softens the grove and stones. Then, slowly, you make your way to the table once more. You lift the basket of cakes and feel their lingering warmth through the woven reeds. Something intimate stirs in your chest, the sweetness of effort completed, the peace of simple work done with care. A fringe tidbit floats through your thoughts. Some believed that honey cakes stored overnight absorbed the gentleness of darkness, making them better for morning blessings. Historians still argue whether this was a genuine belief or just poetic fancy. But tonight, standing here with the warmth settling softly around you, the idea feels tender and true. You carry the basket to a small alcove carved into the wall, a cool niche where food is kept safe overnight. You place the basket inside, adjusting the fig leaves so they cover the cakes lightly. The scent of the leaves rises, earthy and faintly sweet, mingling with the air. You set the clay lid over the niche, leaving a tiny gap for air. The cakes settle into their resting place like children tucked under blankets. You turn back toward the hearth. The tabun glows faintly, like a firefly's slow heartbeat. You crouch beside it again, placing your hand lightly on the warm clay. You whisper a quiet word. Not a prayer, not exactly, just a soft acknowledgement. Fire has served you well tonight. You rise and pick up the cloth used earlier to wipe the wooden tools. Folding it neatly, you place it beside the handstone. Everything feels ordered, complete, at peace. The last of the lamp oil flickers in its shallow dish. You walk to it, adjusting the wick with delicate fingers. The flame steadies, stretches, then softens again. You imagine an ancient child being assigned the important task of trimming the lamp. Too short, and it sputters. Too long, and it smokes. That's your second gentle joke. The farmhouse grows quieter still. The night leans in, patient and soft. You pull your woven sleeping mat from the corner. The straw inside rustles faintly as you unroll it on the floor near the residual warmth of the taban. You smooth your hand along the mat's surface, pressing out a few bumps. You sit carefully, then stretch your legs before folding them beneath you. The warmth from the hearth coats your skin like a gentle blanket. You breathe in deeply. Honey, warm earth, fading smoke, olive wood, soft herbs. All of it settles inside you like a story curling into its final chapter. You lower yourself onto the mat. The earth beneath you feels solid, grounding, timeless. You tuck the edge of the blanket around your legs, feeling the faint scratch of the woven fibers. The oil lamp flickers again, its glow softening into amber clouds along the walls. Your eyelids grow heavy. Somewhere in the rafters, the little lizard from earlier makes a soft, contented sound. Your third light joke, imagining it settling into its sleeping nook after inspecting your cleaning efforts. You turn onto your side, exhaling a slow breath. The fire gives one last gentle pop. The night settles around you like a warm, ancient hand resting across your shoulders. Sleep edges nearer, soft, fragrant, honey-colored. You close your eyes. The farmhouse breathes. You breathe with it, and sweetness drifts through the darkness. The warmth of the taban fades into a deep, velvety glow, leaving the air soft and cool around your resting form. Each breath moves gently through you, unhurried, as though time itself has slowed to match the rhythm of your settling heartbeat. The earthen floor beneath your mat grows quiet, holding the last traces of heat in small, whispered pulses. The night wraps itself loosely around your shoulders, like a shawl woven from moonlight and memory. Above you, the oil lamp lowers its flame into a small, steady glow, its amber light slipping softly across the wall, stretching into quiet, rounded edges. Shadows lengthen and soften, dissolving into the warm hush of the farmhouse. The scents of honey and grain linger faintly in the air, drifting in slow, delicate currents that lull your senses deeper into rest. Outside, the olive trees breathe with the night wind, their leaves brushing together in gentle murmurs. The world feels far away now, softened into a kind of waking dream, where even the smallest sound arrives wrapped in stillness. The distant earth cools, the stars remain watchful, and the moon hangs low, dimming into pale silver. Your body grows heavier, sinking into the mat as each muscle softens. The warm fullness in your chest loosens into calm. Your breaths lengthen, becoming smooth and quiet, matching the gentle pulse of the cooling hearth. The farmhouse holds you, steady and ancient, as though it has known this rhythm for centuries. Thoughts drift like feathers. Sweetness lingers, warmth fades into calm. And slowly the night invites you to let go completely, to drift into the soft, dream-filled quiet that waits patiently just beyond the edge of waking.